King Charles Powerless. As Harry and Meghan's Shadow Monarchy takes over. The truth exposed. There is something deeply unsettling happening inside the most famous royal family in the world right now. And almost nobody is talking about it with the honesty it deserves. On the surface, everything looks fine. King Charles is on the throne. The Union Jack flies over Buckingham Palace. The institution of the monarchy carries on with its pageantry, its traditions, its carefully rehearsed public appearances. But underneath all of that, beneath the polished exterior and the official press releases, something is shifting. Something that those inside the palace walls are watching with a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and a helplessness they would never openly admit to. Because the truth is, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have done something that no one in the history of the British royal family has ever quite managed to do before. They have built a second version of the monarchy, a parallel operation, a shadow monarchy that operates outside the control of Buckingham Palace, outside the reach of royal aides, and increasingly outside the ability of King Charles himself to do anything about it. And the most extraordinary part of all of this, King Charles, the man who sits on the throne of one of the most powerful symbolic institutions on earth, appears to be completely and utterly powerless to stop it. Now, to understand how we got here, you have to go back. You have to understand the story, not just from the headlines, not just from the carefully crafted statements that come out of Kensington Palace or Buckingham Palace, but from the deeper current that has been running through this family for years. Because what Harry and Meghan have built did not happen overnight. It was constructed slowly, deliberately, and with a level of strategic thinking that many people in the British establishment drastically underestimated. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from their roles as senior working royals in January of 2020, the official line from the palace was measured. There were statements about respect, about wishing them well, about finding a workable arrangement. But behind closed doors, the mood was very different. People close to the institution described a sense of shock, not just at the decision itself, but at the way it was handled. Harry and Meghan had announced their intention to step back before any formal agreement had been reached with the palace. They had gone public before the Queen had been fully consulted. They had, in the eyes of many senior courtiers, broken one of the most fundamental rules of royal life. You do not go outside the family. You do not take your grievances to the public. You do not operate independently without the sanction of the institution. But Harry and Meghan did exactly that, and in doing so, they set the tone for everything that was to follow. The Sandringham Summit, as it became known, was supposed to resolve everything. The Queen sat down with Charles, William, and Harry to work out the terms of their departure. But even then, those close to the situation noted that the power dynamic had already shifted in a way that was uncomfortable for the palace. Harry and Meghan were not supplicants asking for permission. They were, in effect, presenting terms. They wanted to keep their royal titles. They wanted to maintain some form of public role. They wanted financial independence. And crucially, they wanted the freedom to pursue opportunities outside the traditional constraints of royal life. Some of those requests were denied. Others were partially granted. But the most significant outcome of that summit was not what was agreed. It was what it revealed. The palace, for all its power and tradition, had very limited tools to force Harry and Meghan to comply with its wishes. They could remove funding. They could strip certain patronages. They could issue statements expressing disappointment. But they could not control what Harry and Meghan said publicly. They could not stop them from signing deals with Netflix and Spotify. They could not prevent them from sitting down with Oprah Winfrey and saying things that would reverberate around the world. The institution was discovering, in real time, the limits of its own authority. And Harry and Meghan were discovering something too. They were discovering just how powerful their brand actually was outside the confines of the royal family. The Netflix deal reportedly worth around $100 million. The Spotify deal. The book deal for Harry's memoir, Spare, which became one of the fastest-selling non-fiction books in publishing history. The speaking engagements. The foundation work. One by one, the building blocks of an entirely independent operation were being put into place. And each new deal, each new project, each new public appearance sent the same message back to Buckingham Palace. We do not need you. We are doing just fine on our own. But here is where things get really interesting. Because what Harry and Meghan have built is not just a celebrity lifestyle brand. It is something more specific than that. It is something that very deliberately echoes the structure and the symbolism of royal life, while simultaneously operating completely outside it. Think about the way they present themselves on official engagements. Think about the trips they take to places like Nigeria, where they were received with the kind of ceremony and pageantry that would normally be reserved for official state visits. Think about the way local dignitaries and officials treat them. Think about the crowds that turn out to see them. Think about the photographs that emerge from these trips. Photographs that look, feel, and function almost exactly like the kind of official royal tour photographs that come out of Kensington Palace or Buckingham Palace. That Nigeria trip in particular stopped a lot of people in their tracks. Harry and Meghan arrived in Abuja in May of 2024, and what followed was extraordinary. They met with the Nigerian president. They attended military events. They visited schools and community organizations. They were treated in every practical sense as visiting dignitaries of the highest order. The coverage was enormous. The images were everywhere. And sitting back in London, watching all of this unfold, those inside the palace were reportedly struggling to process what they were seeing, because this was not a celebrity making a goodwill visit to a foreign country. This was something that looked, at every turn, like an official royal tour. And the problem, the deeply uncomfortable problem for Buckingham Palace, was that they had no mechanism to stop it. Harry and Meghan are private citizens. They can travel wherever they want. They can meet whoever wants to meet them. They cannot be told by the palace where they can and cannot go, who they can and cannot see. The institution that once controlled their every movement, that once approved their every public engagement, had lost that control entirely. And King Charles, the man at the head of that institution, was left watching from a distance. Now, some people will say at this point, why doesn't Charles simply strip Harry of his titles? Why not remove the Duke and Duchess of Sussex designations entirely and make it crystal clear that these two individuals have no connection whatsoever to the British royal family? It sounds simple. It sounds like the obvious solution. But the reality is far more complicated than that, and understanding why gets to the heart of why Charles finds himself in such a genuinely difficult position. First, there is the legal and constitutional complexity. Titles in the British system are not simply handed out and taken back at will. They are bound up in centuries of precedent, royal warrants, and legal frameworks that make the unilateral removal of a dukedom an extraordinarily complicated undertaking. It has been done before, but rarely, and always with significant legal and political ramifications. Second, and perhaps more importantly, there is the question of what stripping Harry of his titles would actually achieve. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody in the palace wants to say out loud. Harry and Meghan's power does not come from their titles. It never really did. Their power comes from their global profile, their media relationships, their commercial partnerships, and above all, their story. The narrative of the couple who walked away from the royal family, who chose freedom over duty, who spoke their truth regardless of the consequences. That narrative is extraordinarily powerful, and stripping them of their titles would not diminish it. If anything, it would amplify it. It would give Harry and Meghan another chapter to add to the story, another grievance, another piece of evidence that the institution had treated them unfairly. Charles knows this. His advisors know this. And so the palace finds itself trapped in a position where action and inaction are both problematic. Act, and you hand Harry and Meghan a gift. Do nothing, and you allow the Shadow Monarchy to keep growing. There is also the personal dimension to consider, because for all the institutional complexity, at the heart of this story, there is a father and a son who have a relationship that is, by all accounts, deeply damaged, but not entirely broken. Sources who have spoken about the dynamic between Charles and Harry describe a situation that is painfully sad. A father who genuinely loves his son, but feels betrayed by his choices. A son who feels that he was never truly supported by his family, that he raised concerns about his wife's mental health and was not taken seriously, that he was left to navigate impossible pressures without the protection he needed. The Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, and then the memoir Spare brought all of those grievances into the public domain in a way that caused enormous pain to the royal family. The accusations made, the details revealed, the portrait painted of life inside the palace, all of it landed like a series of hammer blows. And yet, even after all of that, those who know Charles describe a man who has not given up on the idea of some kind of reconciliation with his younger son, who has kept the door at least slightly ajar, who has not taken the most drastic steps available to him precisely because he is still, underneath everything, a father. That emotional complexity is part of what makes it so difficult for Charles to take decisive action, because every option he has available to him carries the risk of making the breach permanent, and that is a risk he is not yet willing to take. But while Charles hesitates, the Shadow Monarchy keeps building, and the people around Meghan in particular are very clear-eyed about what they are doing and why. Because Meghan Markle is not someone who stumbled into this situation by accident. She is, by every account of those who have worked with her, a woman of exceptional intelligence, exceptional drive, and exceptional strategic clarity. She understood from very early in her time as a working royal that the institution was not going to fully accommodate her. She understood the limitations. She saw the ceiling. And when the decision was made to leave, she moved with a purposefulness that left many people in the British establishment struggling to keep up. The rebranding has been meticulous. The Sussex website, the Sussex social media presence, the carefully curated public appearances, the choice of projects, not just commercially driven but image-driven, designed to position Harry and Meghan as global humanitarian figures, with a platform and a purpose that transcends any particular institution. The work with the Archewell Foundation, the advocacy around mental health and media responsibility, the positioning on issues of race and representation. Every element of the public image has been carefully constructed to tell a story, And the story is this: we are not just former royals. We are something more than that. We are a force for good in the world. And we do not need the approval of Buckingham Palace to be that. It is, whatever you think of Harry and Meghan personally, an impressive piece of brand architecture. And it has worked in ways that even some of their critics are reluctantly forced to acknowledge. The Nigeria trip was the moment when a lot of people started using the phrase Shadow Monarchy for the first time. But the truth is, the architecture had been in place for years before that. The moment Harry and Meghan signed the Netflix deal, the moment they began building a global media operation with their names and their story at the center, the Shadow Monarchy was already taking shape. Nigeria was just the moment it became impossible to ignore. And what makes it particularly complicated for Charles is that Harry and Meghan have been very careful, at least in public, to avoid the most inflammatory framing. They do not describe what they are doing as a rival operation. They do not set themselves up explicitly in opposition to the monarchy. In fact, Harry has gone out of his way at various points to express his love for his country, his respect for the institution, his desire for reconciliation with his family. That framing, that careful maintenance of a posture that is not openly hostile, makes it very difficult for the palace to respond in kind. Because if Charles were to come out swinging, to make a public statement attacking Harry and Meghan's activities, he would look petty. He would look threatened. He would, in the eyes of much of the watching world, look like exactly the kind of out-of-touch institution that Harry and Meghan have always said drove them away. So Charles says nothing, and the Shadow Monarchy grows. There are people inside, the British establishment, who are deeply alarmed by all of this. Former courtiers and royal commentators who speak, usually on background, about the long-term damage they believe Harry and Meghan are doing to the institution. Their concern is not really about any single trip or any single deal. It is about what all of it adds up to over time. The monarchy, they will tell you, depends on a certain kind of singularity. The idea that there is one royal family, one institution, one set of values and traditions that the public looks to for a particular kind of symbolic leadership. The moment you have a parallel operation, a second center of royal adjacent gravity, you begin to complicate that singularity. You begin to create confusion in the public mind about what the monarchy actually is and who actually speaks for it. And in an era when the monarchy is already under significant pressure, when questions about its relevance and its cost and its future are being asked with increasing frequency, that confusion is not a small thing. It is, in the view of some very serious people, an existential risk. But those voices, for all their concern, do not have a solution to offer, because the fundamental problem remains. There is nothing the palace can do. There is no lever they can pull, no statement they can make, no legal mechanism they can employ that would stop Harry and Meghan from doing what they are doing. They are private citizens. They are operating within the law. They have every right to travel, to work, to build a business, to present themselves to the world in whatever way they choose. The king is powerless, and everyone knows it. What Charles has been able to do, and what he has clearly chosen to do, is to simply not engage, to maintain a studied silence on the subject of Harry and Meghan's activities, to let the institution continue doing what it does, conducting its own tours, making its own appearances, issuing its own statements, and trusting that over time, the weight and legitimacy of the actual monarchy will speak for itself. It is a strategy built on patience and on the assumption that the Harry and Meghan phenomenon, however powerful it looks right now, will eventually lose its novelty. that the public appetite for their story will diminish, that without the oxygen of royal family drama to fuel it, the Shadow Monarchy will gradually fade. Maybe that is right. Maybe the palace's patience will eventually be rewarded. But there are good reasons to be skeptical, because Harry and Meghan have shown a remarkable ability to keep reinventing themselves, to find new angles on their story, to generate new sources of interest and attention. And as long as there are people around the world who find their narrative compelling, as long as there are foreign governments who see value in hosting them, as long as there are commercial partners willing to pay for access to their platform, the Shadow Monarchy has fuel. There is one more dimension to all of this that deserves to be considered, and it is perhaps the most significant of all, the question of legacy, because both Charles and Harry are, in their different ways, thinking about how history will judge them. Charles, at 75, having waited his entire life to be king, is acutely aware that his reign may be shorter than he would like. He wants to be remembered as a reforming monarch, as someone who modernized the institution, who took it into the 21st century with its relevance and its dignity intact. The last thing he wants is for his reign to be defined by a family dispute. The last thing he wants is for the story of his kingship to be overshadowed by the story of his son's departure. And Harry, for his part, is constructing his own legacy with equal deliberateness, the memoir, the documentary, the public advocacy. All of it is part of a project to ensure that his version of events, his account of what happened inside the royal family and why he left, becomes the dominant version. He is fighting a historical battle as much as a personal one, and he has significant resources to fight it with. Charles cannot win that battle by engaging with it directly. Every time the palace responds to Harry and Meghan, every time a courtier brief against them, or a statement is issued pushing back on their narrative, it simply gives the story more oxygen. It validates the idea that there is a conflict worth paying attention to. So Charles does not engage. He endures. He waits. He hopes. But hope is not a strategy. And patience, however necessary it may feel in the short term, does not address the underlying problem. The Shadow Monarchy is real. It is growing. And the King of England, for all his power and his precedent, and his position at the head of one of the world's most famous institutions, does not currently have a way to stop it. That is the truth that nobody in the palace wants to say out loud. That is the reality that sits beneath all the carefully managed public statements and the dignified silences. Somewhere in Montecito, California, Harry and Meghan are building something. Whether it lasts, whether it grows, whether it eventually fades, nobody can say for certain. But right now, in this moment, it exists. The Shadow Monarchy is real, and King Charles is watching it happen with very little he can do to change the course of events. The throne may be his, but the story right now belongs to them.